change gears just a little bit, just this much. And I thought what we'd do was talk a little bit about a different kind of future and a different way of thinking about that future. But I realized as I've come from Australia, I actually wanted to start with a thing we do at all Australian events, which is acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the Alawan people, the Indigenous people of this area, and I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and their leaders emerging. And the reason we do that in Australia, and I wish we did it here, is it's a way of saying we have conversations about the present and the future in places that have been continuously occupied, in this instance, for more than 10,000 years. And there's something really powerful about acknowledging that our conversations about the future have a past. And so I want to pay my respects that way. Which should immediately give something else about me away. I'm not a technologist, I'm an anthropologist. And I'm also the child of an anthropologist. I grew up on my mum's field sites in central and northern Australia in the 1970s and 1980s. I spent my time living with Aboriginal people who remembered their first sight of Europeans, their first sight of cattle, and their first sight of fences, not always in that order. And I spent most of my childhood not wearing shoes, speaking Warlpiri, and getting to kill things. Basically, best childhood ever. Of course, I also ate those things because I know people worry about what that would mean. So I grew up in Ali Kurrang in Central Australia, and it's an incredibly long way from Ali Kurrang to Silicon Valley. And a longer way still, it turns out, from having a PhD in cultural anthropology at Stanford to being at Intel. Although they're not very far apart physically, they're very far apart in terms of the imagination. It's a long story to tell about how I ended up at Intel. The short version of it is I met a man in a bar. For those of you under the age of 30, this is not career advice. I met a man in a bar, he introduced me to Intel, and I've spent the last 20 years there. My job there has been to bring stories about people and what people care about, what frustrates them, what they're passionate in, and what they're passionate about, into the ways in which we make new technology. So companies like Intel have always built the future. We built them because of what we can do technically. My job was to make sure we also built them because they were the things that people would care about. So 20 years, I was the little voice going, oh wait, what about people? And then about 2 years ago, I moved to Australia to take up a new role at the Australian National University, where I find myself inexplicably as a distinguished professor of engineering and computer science. Don't tell my father, because while my mother is an anthropologist, my father is an engineer, and he is horrified that anyone thinks I might be. But that means I get to spend my time thinking about the future and thinking about how we would constantly put people in it. And I know over the course of today and the last 3 days and the rest of the afternoon, you're going to hear people talking about artificial intelligence and robotics and all the technical pieces. I want to talk a little bit about the social pieces and about the questions we should ask and how we might prepare for that future. 2 years ago, the World Economic Forum published this graph. It's great. It tidies up the last 250 years of history. Like, for those of you who weren't paying attention in high school, it's all you need to know. There were steam engines, then there was electricity, then there were computers. We're done. Now, of course, you should immediately know I have some issues with this chart. Like, it doesn't have any people in it. Problem number one. Problem number two, it kind of suggests this is linear, and most of us know that it really wasn't quite like that. And of course, the third thing it never says, right, is that in indexing on each one of those technologies, it didn't talk about the socio-technical systems we built. It talks about the steam engine, but it doesn't talk about the railway. It talks about computers, but it doesn't talk about digitization and the ecosystem that we all sit in. So what would it be if you were to unpack those and say, what's really going on in there? Well, the reality is each one of those technologies required more than just technologists. It required all these other people to bring those technologies safely to scale. And for that scale to be one that we could manage, we could live with, and that we found ways to be safe with. And it's that last wave that interests me. What the World Economic Forum calls cyber-physical systems. What you should think those are is AI inside stuff that isn't computers. So every time you hear someone talk about a robot or a drone or an autonomous vehicle or a smart building or a smart lift, they're talking about cyber-physical systems. So what's the challenge there, right? Well, the challenge and the opportunity, frankly, is about how we get to that moment. How do we go from AI as the steam engine to the metaphoric railway, to the cyber-physical system? What will it take to do that safely and at scale? Well, I think it actually means there are 5 questions we should be thinking about, and I want to rehearse them for you really briefly. Good news is 3 of them start with A, so you should be able to remember them. First question we need to ask is, will those systems actually be autonomous? We talk about it a lot. We talk about autonomous vehicles, autonomous software. Turns out if you ask anyone who's building those systems, they all have a different definition of what they mean by autonomous. And the problem for us who aren't engineers, the humans amongst us, every time I say autonomous, in your head, semantic slippage happens. I say autonomous, you think sentient, conscious, self-aware. And if you grew up with science fiction, you know what happens next. Frankenstein, somewhere lurking over there. Now, the reality, of course, is systems can be autonomous without being sentient or conscious. Autonomy merely means operating without reference to a prearranged set of rules in this instance, right? But how we architect it, how we build it, who gets to decide what's autonomous and who isn't, who gets to decide how that's regulated, how it's secured, what its network implications are, those are not just questions for computer scientists and engineers, right? Those are questions for philosophers and people in the humanities and people who make laws and, frankly, for all of us in the room. What does it mean to have systems that will be autonomous? How will we feel about that? What will it mean? How will we even signal it? How will you know it's an autonomous system? Should it have a little red A on it? Does it have to announce every time it turns up, "Hi, I'm autonomous"? Because that's going to get really irritating really quickly. But trust me, we need to know, because I'm willing to bet I'm not the only person in the room who has gotten into a smart elevator recently and watched people around me freeze in blank horror when they realize there are no buttons. And you are now in a lift over which you have no control, and no one warned you in advance. So how are we going to create a grammar for autonomous systems? First set of questions. Second set of questions about how we put humans back into this story is to ask, who's going to set the limits and controls on these systems? The A here is agency. How will we determine how far those systems can go without us? Who gets to determine those rules? Are they built in the object or outside the object? If we think about autonomous vehicles, we know they have rules sitting inside them, but are we going to want to have an ability to override those things? If you're the emergency services, do you want to be able to say, take all cars off the road so we can get a fire truck through? Of course you do, but who gets to decide when you use that? How are those rules going to work across boundaries, across countries, across cultures? How are they going to get updated? How are they going to get made visible? Again, they're technical questions, but they're also social and human and cultural questions. Third set of questions are what I call the assurance questions, because all the words are complicated. Risk, liability, trust, privacy, ethics, manageability, explicability, ease of use. It's easy to blow past all of that, but we're talking about systems that have some degree of autonomy and some degree of agency. How are we going to decide who's responsible for them? How will we decide how much risk we can tolerate? And who's going to decide that? What does it mean to think about the systems being safe? Are they safe for the occupants inside the systems, for the people outside of the systems, for the cities in which they operate? Who gets to decide what the ethics are? Who gets to litigate the ethical dilemmas and indeed the rules? How will we think about explicability? We have legislation that's unfolding in Europe, the GDPR, which asks the capacity for any algorithm to explain itself, or at least the companies that build them. That's a technical question of how we create backtracing, how we create explicability, how we unbox algorithms. They're technical questions, but they're also social and cultural questions. What's it going to take to feel safe? And will that change over time? Will there be a moment when you don't worry when you get into the lift that there are no buttons because you know what to do? And how long will that take? And who will be the people making us safe in the meantime? Fourth set of questions are about how will we measure these systems? So when AI goes safely to scale, how will we decide if it's a good system or a bad system? And I know that sounds banal, but for 250 years, the Industrial Revolution proceeded by us saying, was that system efficient and productive? Did it save time or did it save money? Did it use less labor? What are the metrics we want to use here? For autonomous vehicles, we're told that it's about safety. For the lifts that so preoccupy me, it's because I read a lot of Douglas Adams as a child, I'm convinced those lifts are prescient. Those lifts, we're told, those are about saving energy and electricity at the expense of where humans sit in the ecosystem, right? But what are the metrics going to be, and how do we want to think about that? We know that all of this computation, whether it is algorithms, whether it is machine learning, whether it's augmented decision making, it all requires processor power, and it all requires electricity. So how are we going to decide how those things are unfolded in a manner that is sustainable, in a manner that is manageable. And oh, by the way, I know this because I've spent 20 years at Intel. You will measure the things that matter, and conversely, what you measure is what you make. So we have an opportunity here to think about what the metrics are in advance rather than after the fact. I'm almost willing to bet that if Watt and Newcomen had been asked 250 years ago about how to build a better steam engine, and they'd realized that the one they'd built was going to chop down every tree in Britain, they might have thought about it differently. So what are the metrics we want here? And last but by no means least, I think there's this open question, the fifth question for me, about how are we going to be human in that world? What are going to be the ways we interface with these systems? I grew up in Silicon Valley. I spent 25 years here, and it's been an exquisite and an extraordinary privilege. But I also know in that period of time, the way we interacted with computing was pretty narrow. Keyboard, screen, a little bit of voice, some gesture later. I'm not sure we should be interacting with these systems that way. And I'm pretty certain that most of the UX that me and my teams have spent building for the last 20 years isn't what we want to drag into the future with us. You do not want to get into an autonomous vehicle and have to remember whether it's a 10 to 12 character password with an uppercase and a lowercase and an alphanumeric, and which system you are using. And you probably don't want to be constantly using your biometric systems either, and you may not want to talk to everything because everyone else will be talking to it too. So the metaphors may not work. How are we going to think about all that stuff differently? And what's it going to feel like to be human when systems are making decisions that we're used to make? When they're doing things we're used to doing? When we can't always see what's happening? And oh, by the way, when some of those systems are talking to each other, not even about us. Great human fear, irrelevance. The machines don't want to kill us, they're just not interested in what we're thinking. Different problem. So how are we going to imagine what the interaction is going to be here, right? What will that look like? So 5 big questions. Scaling AI and doing it safely means we have to answer those questions. What does it mean to think about, will these systems be autonomous, and if so, which version? What will agency look like? How do we think about safety and assurance? What are the metrics we want to measure it by? And oh, by the way, how are we going to engage with these things or not engage with them? Here's the problem. I can ask you 5 questions. I don't have answers to any of them, which is the great disappointment of being an anthropologist. We know how to ask questions, we don't always know how to answer them. But 2 years ago, I stepped out of my job at Intel and went back to Australia with the explicit purpose of trying to work out how to answer those questions, because I think answering them gets us somewhere important. I started with that chart from the World Economic Forum, and I said each one of those previous waves generated things. But part of what they generated was new bodies of knowledge. Machines, mechanization brought us engineers. Electricity and mass production brought us electrical engineers. Computers brought us computer scientists. What's cyberphysical systems going to bring us? Well, that's what I decided I was going to build. And the joy of being right here, right now on this stage is it's one of the few places in the world I can say it and you're not going to laugh at me. Because when you stand up and say, I thought I'd build a new branch of engineering, there are very few places except Silicon Valley you can say that. So my plan is to build a new branch of engineering or a new applied science. I think we actually need to answer those questions and we need to find a new way of approaching the problem. So a year ago, we launched a new institute at the Australian National University in Canberra. We recruited a small team, and 6 weeks ago, we put out a call for our first cohort of students. Because the university wanted me to wait 3 more years, and I went, hell no. It's like, I think we can go faster. And so we decided in the grand tradition of Silicon Valley to build a curriculum in real time and iterate it like it was a prototype. Build it, invite the people who want to learn with us, and iterate in real time with those people. So we put out a call, on Twitter mostly, I'd have to say, 6 weeks ago, and said, you've got 5 weeks, go. And I didn't think we'd get that many applicants, and I usually can think pretty big. We closed it out a week ago. We had 173 people from around the world who were willing to put their hands up to take a year out of their life to come to a degree program that has no name in a town that, if you're from Australia, is not very compelling, to build something new. And I thought that was a pretty good sign that we're onto something interesting. So here's my ask. It's daunting to say you want to build a new applied science or a new branch of engineering. It's frankly crazy. What I know from my time in the Valley is that you never do these things once and you never do it alone. So if for any of you in the room at any moment in time you thought, okay, she sounds crazy, but I kind of like what she's saying, will you come find me? Track me down, send me an email, find my team, because we're going to need all the help we can get to scale. So with that, I want to stop and say thank you.